Hey there, Heather Holler, Drift Cutter Diamond. Welcome you to yet another Cutter Top 10 video. And yes, it will be Olympic based. We're going to be looking at the top 10 worst Olympics in history, as in the terrible stuff to do with the Olympics. Not every Olympics can be bangers and all that. What's even more impressive, in a sense, is when I did my research for the top 10 worst Olympics ever, was that none of the Olympics actually were Winter Olympics. Like, when you look at the Winter Olympics, Chamonix was the first one in 1924. You can't blame them. St. Moritz, 1928. Lake Placid, 32 wasn't that bad. Berlin, 36. Sorry, Garmisch-Partenkirchen, Germany, 36, but Hitler's propaganda machine. 48 St. Moritz, 52 Oslo, 56 Cortina, 60 Squaw Valley, 64 um, Innsbruck, 68 Grenoble, then came Sapporo, Innsbruck, Lake Placid, Sarajevo. Well, Sarajevo was war torn. Calgary, Albertville, Lillehammer, Nagano, Salt Lake, Torino, Vancouver, uh, Sochi, Pyeongchang, or is it Pyongyang? Pyongyang, and then Beijing, and now Milan. Well, I mean, Sochi. The problem is Sochi was in the top 10 Winter Olympics, so technically it would be bad. So anyway, we have 10 Olympics for you, all winter games, summer games. All right, here we go. Number 10 is Atlanta 1996. The Centennial Games should not have been in Atlanta in the first place. It should have been in Athens where it belongs, 1896, 1996. I mean, Toronto did try for the 96 Olympics and all that and ended up, you know, losing to Atlanta. I mean, everyone in Toronto thought that the Olympics were coming to Canada, the Summer Olympics. They would have had a good one. Anyway, unfortunately, though, Atlanta getting it and commercialization overshadowed the spirit of the games. I mean, like, lots of sponsors sponsor it because that's where the money comes from for the city and all that. But yeah, a lot of Coca-Cola stuff and all that. Well, of course, Atlanta is the home of Coca-Cola. There was logistical problems, and of course, in the middle of the Olympics came that bombing in Centennial Park. Fortunately, though, like only one person died and 100 people were injured. Like it could have been worse. They actually accused the security guard Richard Jewell of actually planting the bomb so that he could be a hero and all that. The FBI basically harassed him. After a year, they couldn't find anything on him, so they had to stop investigating him. But the emotional scars were still there for Jewell. He ended up dying, what, in 2003? And all that. And then they finally found the guy, Eric Rudolph, and all that. So yeah, poor Richard Jewell and all that. I mean, lots of papers did have retractions and all that. So they had to. But yeah, Atlanta had some good moments. I mean, Ali was given his a gold medal after he threw his into the Kentucky River because of the racism in 1960, and Kerry Strug's famous fault. But yeah, there were some logistical problems. All that. One of these that did not make the list, the 2008 in Beijing, was big, but in 2008, it was big for Beijing to do well. Toronto was close in 2001. I think Toronto would have gotten it, but Mel Lastman, our mayor, basically said that, Africans, I don't want to go to Africa for votes because I might be in a pot of boiling water. His words, not mine. And that cost him dearly. Number 9 is Athens 2004. Speaking of Athens, when they got the Olympics, it was a mess. 8 years after being passed over by Atlanta of all teams. Well, Sydney did a great Olympics in 2000, but in 2004, Athens was finally going to get the Olympics. It was coming home. The Olympics were coming home. Unfortunately, though, there were problems with Athens. Construction delays, cost overruns, and lingering debt. Oh, yeah. The cost overruns and lingering debt really ruined them. They were building the infrastructure cost them a lot, even though that the planner was the first female to take charge of an Olympics thing. Athens, she tried her best, but in the sense, it didn't work out so well. Yeah, the cost overruns were terrible. It was like what 180% of national debt or something like that. Basically, Greece had to borrow money to survive in a sense. Like Greece has been known for their debt crisis, and for many people to say that they would buy Greece to buy, buy their own country and all that. But yeah, it was just terrible, and the Greek people didn't like it at all. That the modern Olympics were just not what they want, and of course they have had some venues that have basically shrunk. Number 8 is St. Louis, 1904. St. Louis had some problems too. International participation was minimal, not like 1906 when the U.S. did their 10th anniversary games. But the marathon was infamous for dangerous conditions. Yeah, that marathon was massive in 1904. They didn't have a lot of people competing. There were a couple of African runners who were in for the World's Fair. And this wouldn't be the first time the World's Fair would overshadow the Olympics. I mean, I give the World's Fair a bit of a pass because, this is 1904 and the other one on this list was 1900. When, the Olympics were just young and the World's Fair was more spectacular and people wanted to go to the World's Fair more than the Olympics. I mean, Montreal hosted the World Fair in 67 and Vancouver in 86 and all that. But yeah, the World's Fair happened. And St. Louis's thing was overshadowed. Yeah, the marathon was humongous. You got all those people. You got one guy, Felix Carvajal, who was going to go from Cuba to the U.S. to compete. But unfortunately, he was taken advantage of and he was wearing a suit and all that. Finally, though, he got cut for a proper uniform, and he was actually doing quite well. He probably would have medaled, but he had hunger problems and got stomach cramps. Anyway, yeah, the marathon, the cars were moving up and kicking up lots of dust and all that people had to breathe and all that. And what's even worse is the winner of the 1904 marathon actually rode in a car for like half the distance, Fred Loros, and he was shamed. So yeah, the reason why it's low on this list in a sense is because it was the 1900s. Number 7 is Montreal, 1976. To be fair, I mean, most of Montreal's problems came after the Olympics. The Olympics weren't that half bad. Like, they were decent during the Olympics. Like, Montreal, yeah, they had the problems because they wanted that Olympic stadium with the retractable roof that looked like an umbrella system. And then, of course, there was the cost overruns, the construction problems in Montreal, the French architect not liking what he saw, and, he took too long for the roof. So Montreal was kind of in a bit of a pickle. So anyway, Montreal had some things going for it. The Queen opened up the Olympics. Greg Joy with his silver medal performance at the high jump, losing to the Polish high jumper, but beat Dwight Stones, who basically pissed off French Canadians. Greg Joy's leap was so famous that when CBC signed off for the evening for 15 years, that was part of the montage. But yeah, Canada could not win a gold medal to save their lives. They had 2 silvers and 3 bronzes, but that was it. 5 medals, nothing else. East Germany dominated the women's swimming, but of course we found out that they were doping and all that. Bruce Jenner won the decathlon. Well, I should say Caitlyn Jenner now, but as she was known as first, Bruce Jenner had a decathlon, and Jenner was a famous athlete and all that, who could do no wrong. But things happen. But that's all of it. But as I said, the problems came after the Olympics because of the cost overrun. It took Montreal 3 decades to pay off their Olympic debt, which is like humongous and all that, especially that Olympic Stadium being a white elephant, as they call it. Number 6 is the 1900 Olympics. The reason why it gets high on the list is because of how much they didn't even want the Olympics. Well, actually, how much there were problems and all that. The 1900 Olympics were disorganized, bad scheduling. It took like 4 months to do all the Olympic events. Today, it takes 16 to 19 days. But the fact is that they spread it out over 4 months. The World's Fair was in Paris, so that's why they had the Olympics. And worst of all, the whole advertising thing, if you will, didn't help out. They basically put more emphasis on the World's Fair more so than the Olympics, like 1904, but 1900 was way more tragic in a sense. Number 5 is Tokyo 2020. Well, 2021 technically. You can understand why. Obviously, if you know, you know, and you should know because in 2020 the world was going the sports world was going through deep loss as Kobe Bryant passed away. I think there was one or two more famous deaths in 2020 beforehand. But then came the damn COVID, which ruined sports, ruined everyone's lives. Trust me. And all that. Tokyo was going to host this great Olympics in 2020, but of course they had to shift it because of COVID. It got shifted to 2021. And worst of all, the fans were not allowed to be there for the Olympic events. Like Japan was going through the runs as, COVID people and all that. And a lot of people were shocked because Japan, when you see them like pre 2020, you see the TV shows and all that. A lot of them are wearing masks and all that. And it's like, well, Japan always takes good care of themselves. They have a good healthcare system. But the fact is that no healthcare system could save them and all that. Now there were logistical and financial challenges, but that was even before the COVID ruined everything. One guy was forced to resign because he plagiarized someone's logo for himself for the 2020 Olympics. There was misconduct from the head of the Tokyo Olympic bid, and a lot of things happened. And this, of course, as I said, before COVID. The games were held without spectators, which sucked because, you would have fantastic moments, including those Italian and Qatari high jumpers deciding to both take a gold medal instead of jumping off for it. You had Canada winning the soccer tournament, the women's soccer tournament against Sweden. Of course, this was before the drone incident, which pisses me off. Is like, why would Canada resort to drones and all that? Canada did well and ruined us, and so it should have. Anyway, yeah, Tokyo just had the problems with COVID. Speaking of a virus, number 4, Rio de Janeiro 2016. Rio had bad pollution, poor infrastructure, and political turmoil, especially in Brazil, and health worries over the Zika virus. That's right. Zika took over the Olympic planning more so than, well, just as bad as COVID for Olympics in Tokyo. The Zika virus was there. Babies were born with large heads and all that, deformities and everything else. So the Zika virus was there in Brazil. They wanted the Olympics moved or canceled or delayed, but didn't happen. And of course, Rio was reeling in a sense. I mean, this was the first time South America got the Olympics and all that, which was actually pretty impressive. Now only Africa is left as the only continent that hasn't hosted the Olympics. North America has hosted several Olympics, including Los Angeles '84, which did not make this list because this is the worst, not the best. Europe, of course, like Athens, for example. Asia with Tokyo and Australia with Melbourne 1956 and Sydney 2000. But the fact of the matter is that, yeah, the Olympics were just the Olympics and all that. And Rio had problems. 2 years prior, Brazil won the bid to host the World Cup, and it looked like a big party. But expensive stadiums, bad infrastructure, political turmoil, and all that ruined it. And Brazil losing to Germany in the semifinals didn't help matters. So they took a massive hit. And then 2016, they got the Olympics and had to do the same stuff over and over again. And of course, not much had changed in the Brazilian climate and all that. But that's what happened. Number 3 is Munich, 1976. This was huge. Germany was going to finally get the Olympics and finally try to prove that they had changed since World War Number Two. Of course, the Berlin Games are, of course, number one. I'll say that. But yeah, 72 in Munich was just disastrous and all that. Munich wasn't that bad of a host in a sense. I mean, the Olympics were big. Mark Spitz winning 7 gold medals in the pool. Germany doing decent in defense. Of course, controversy reared its ugly head in the basketball final between the U.S. and the Russians. Americans were up 51-50. Russia inbounded the ball, missed the shot. Game over, right? Wrongo. The officials said that the clock should have been reset from 1 to 3 seconds. Okay, Soviets get a second chance. They missed. And then the head of FIBA, the International Basketball Association, R. William Jones, said that no, it should be back to 3 seconds. And they forced the Americans to back off the pass. And then they got the ball to Belov, who flipped it in the net. And the Russians win 51-50. The Americans were pissed off. So much so, they refused to accept the silver medals. They're in a Lucerne, Switzerland vault, and the families of the people involved in the 72 games can't claim them because of provisions in the will. I mean, the Americans don't win every time. I mean, but this is the time the Americans never lost the basketball gold medal ever since they started in 1936. Of course, R. William Jones famously quoted that the Americans had to learn to lose. I think that, in my sense, he overstepped his boundaries. He was trying his best to make sure another country other than the U.S. won the gold medal because then, people wouldn't send their basketball teams in other than the U.S. and Soviets. I mean, how many countries would have sent their basketball teams in? Because they knew that the Americans were going to win every time. That was kind of a cunt move, if you ask me. But of course, we all know about the Munich massacre, overshadowing the competition, in which Palestinians got in with the Black September regime and killed 2 Israeli athletes in the Olympic Village. And then, of course, had the hostage situation. Jim McKay for ABC did round the clock coverage and all that. And then there was a hostage negotiation thing, but the German government failed and 9 more athletes died. So 11 Israeli athletes died. And of course, some of the people who were involved, some of the terrorists. They did have a day of mourning, but then Avery Brundage, that dickwad of a guy, you'll understand why. I'll talk about Brundage more in 1936. Actually, no, I shouldn't. Anyway, Avery Brundage was the head of the IOC for many years, and he was known for being strictly amateur. I mean, the Olympics are kind of for amateurs. He's got a point, but he has overstepped his boundary. He had overstepped boundaries many times, including the whole Jim Thorpe situation, not giving Jim Thorpe back his gold medal, even though he did play professional Class A baseball, and that was wrong. But he needed the money. But the problem was they didn't file the complaint within 30 days, and that should have been an automatic dismissal, but they didn't. Brundage was a teammate of Jim Thorpe, and a lot of people said he used his influence to make sure Jim Thorpe did not win the gold medals. It didn't take till 1983, after Brundage died, that the Thorpe family got their medals. And then, he was known for maybe blacklisting Jesse Owens. Who knows? His imperialism ruined him. Yeah, he said the Olympics had to move on. Okay, fine, but people were still grieving. Number 2 on the list is not Berlin. It's Moscow, 1980. You can kind of guess why. But yeah, 1980 Moscow, Russia was going to host the Olympics, trying to prove that the Soviet machine was good and all that. There was still there was tension before tension, if you will. The Cold War and all that, and then the Russians invading Afghanistan, and then the hostage situation in Tehran. The world was on a crossroads. We were headed for trouble. They couldn't just postpone the 1980 Winter Olympics. I mean, Russia invaded Afghanistan. The Americans should have forced Russia to pull their athletes from the Winter Olympics. But there was not enough time for anything. So they had to do what they had to do. So yeah, Russia got to host the Olympics. Many countries boycotted it and all that. The Americans led the way by boycotting, saying that they would not go to Russia, who was, hurting Afghanistan. And that was when Afghanistan were the good guys. So, Canada boycotted. I think American pressure. I bet you 90% of the countries that boycotted were worried about what the Americans would do to them. So they had to go along with it. Great Britain did send athletes to the Olympics, but said that participation was, it was your choice. So yeah, many countries were absent from Moscow in 1980, and then the Russians and the Soviet and the Communist bloc refused to go to Los Angeles in 1984, which gave the Americans almost free reign in the medal standings and the gold medal count. Canada did well; they took fourth in the medal standings, but without Russia and Poland and the Czechs and all that, things would have been different. But the fact of the matter was that this boycott ruined it. And yeah, it did break the Olympic ideal, but still, it was tension. And of course, this, alongside his Malays Forever strategy, ruined Jimmy Carter and the polls, and Ronald Reagan swept through, winning the election. And number one, it's number one, it's 1936 Berlin. A lot of people would say, what about 1936 Winter Olympics in Garmisch? They were in Germany too. Yes, they were, but nobody paid much attention to the Winter Olympics except if you were from Norway, Sweden, Finland, or even Canada. So Hitler didn't really need to do the ideals in the winter sports. Besides, Germany and winter don't mix. Talk about their campaign to ruin Russia in 1942. Nevertheless, Berlin was basically a propaganda tool that the Nazi Aryan race would beat everyone in their path and all that. Now, one good thing that came out of Berlin was that Lonnie Rashiro documentary Olympia, which actually saw some very massive innovations for the time. It was 1936, like even having cameras in the pool for diving and all that, which was pretty impressive. But unfortunately, though, Adolf Hitler was there, and Hitler was told, you salute all athletes who won the gold medal or none at all. Of course, he snubbed Jesse Owens because he won 4 gold medals. He was black, everything else. But he snubbed a lot of people too. So, that was a given. So, yeah, the Aryan Master class. But the Americans did well in the Olympics that year. The good old Americans. Of course, 4 years later, the world would go to war. The 1940 and 1944 Olympics were canceled, both in the summer and winter for obvious reasons. London was rebuilding in 1948 when they got the Olympics. And then, of course, the whole Jesse Owens story. It wasn't just Germany that snubbed it. It was the Americans, too. It was crazy because the U.S. also snubbed him in a sense. Because when Jesse Owens went back to the United States, he's won 4 gold medals. He should be fed it. But it wasn't. He was basically shunned because America was very racist. The Mason-Dixon line kind of existed. There was torrid racism and all that. Even though Jesse Owens came from Cleveland, he just couldn't do anything right. Like the states shunned him because he was black. And he was in a northern state. So, in essence, the Americans were worse to Owens than Hitler. And that's saying a whole fucking lot. Jesse Owens was trying his best to make people like him, and a lot of people didn't want to be around him. That is just pathetic. It just goes to prove that sometimes there's an underlying problems, and sometimes Hitler wasn't the worst. Anyway, I'm Jeff Diamond. I do.